What's going on, Workforce? Brian here,
Chris here.
and today we're talking about the casualization of Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. We've both been hands-on. We went on with an early preview build that is subject to change, so any footage that we use could be completely different by the time the game is released here on June the 28th. The build that we used specifically, I think, was April 30th, and we both went on with pretty much all the jobs between us. We've definitely had a lot of time with the game itself. But that being said, Yoshi P has announced within the live letter, and he shared with us as well, the casualization of tanks. And we were saying casualization, and even Twitch chat. Like, I was able to catch the end of the live letter, and I believe there was one or several people kept spanning Casualbringers because tanks lost their DPS stance. You know, we talked about this, we touched on it briefly. They lost their DPS stance. Healers are shifting primarily to healers. They've lost a lot of their damage abilities, and that's what this is focusing in on. Is the game just catering to casuals? Is there any challenge whatsoever? That's what we hope to address here. I'm going to toss to Chris because my monologue is going long.
So, first of all, I want to address the whole healers are growing pure. I do feel that they're pushing more towards healers, but in the live letter, when I watched that translation as opposed to the way the BD event was structured, was we had a 90-minute presentation from Yoshi P that basically consisted of the first half of the live letter.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second half, instead of we were shown the job action trailer, and then for the most part, there was a handful of other slides, and then we were basically said, go play. Mm-hmm. So we didn't really do the whole part where he kind of went through initial rotations and things like that. Instead, we just blindly got to go in and play the game for itself and kind of make up our own opinions. So actually, there were things he pointed out in his live transaction stuff where I was like, well, I didn't come across that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we only got to what we got to. So with the healers, I actually ran the dungeon with a white mage, and there were still damage abilities.
Mm-hmm.
I still multiple. So it's not that they've taken those away. It's not that you're not going to be able to go do solo quests as a healer. It's not that during downtime in a fight, you're not going to be able to contribute damage as a healer. Even though you have a fixed amount of MP now, so you do want to be careful, because I did run myself out of MP a couple times,
Mm-hmm.
Just spamming because I was doing it with a trust, and the trusts are really slow. And so I do want to address that. The healers are still the same healers they were before. They've just started to air them towards, let's see if you can have to do more healing. And a lot of that will come down to the content. The reason we even have time to talk about healers DPSing is because people aren't dying while they're DPSing.
Right. It's boring when you're just standing around. Everybody's at heal. Life's full. I'm just going to sit here. And that's actually where the debate's always been. It's like, well, maybe toss out a dot. Maybe toss out some damage. The game is structured and has been since the beginning. Yoshi P's said this numerous times that they don't factor in healer damage as a part of their DPS checks, right? So what this means, this isn't what I feel is anything new. But to what you just said, Chris, I agree 100%, is that all really depends on the content. If the content doesn't give you room to do damage because you're capped at 10,000 MP as a pool now, if the content doesn't give you room to damage, there's really no debate. If you're standing around and everybody's topped off, you've got full mana, and your board is all heck, you still actually have damage abilities. So it's really going to fall down to the content. My hope is that what this means, as opposed to that, is that the content's going to be freaking nuts. We did it was a level 73 dungeon and had some really cool stuff to it. We both played White Mage. I love that Arrow shifts to Dia, because that for me speaks to my 11 roots, and that Stone switches to Gleam, like with the traits and stuff like that. But it's not like you have this full bar of all these different damage abilities. You're really here to heal, and then you do have the ability to output some damage. And that was actually I thought really was. I'm not like what they changed to healers. Like, I have no objection to. I think it makes sense, and it just hopefully points to the fact that the content is going to require that healers be healing. HBH, yes. Baby.
Yes. So the casualization of tanks.
Yes.
That I do feel is a mistake. I feel like we said that a bit in our last video. It seems to be something that they're doing to try to draw more tanks into the game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that that's a problem in the short term, but I do think it's the kind of thing where long term you can lose that class identity because you're basically removing a role from the game. If all I have to do is basically be a melee DPS with a button, then why can't there be monk tanks? Why can't there be ninja tanks? Why can't there be samurai tanks? All you got to do is give me a button that I toggle that increases my survivability and increases my enmity generation. There's nothing different. At that point, why not be a red mage tank?
Right. That would be cool. Honestly, if they ended up going
having
that direction, I mean, that's a bigger shift, but that would be really kind of interesting, in my opinion.
I disagree.
I mean, I think the change sucks, but it's like, I'm telling you, like, your idea, like, what's the difference? Like, at some point, like, yeah, what is the difference? Why can't I tank as a monk with that certain toggle on? Like, oh, I'm a tank now, you know?
Right. So basically, there's two sides to an MMO when balancing classes. The first is you have to make content clearable by any combination of the classes, or class will die.
When matchmaking is present.
When matchmaking is present, or when you have people investing huge amounts of times in a class identity. So if people spend 600 hours leveling up and gearing up their warrior, and then for one patch cycle, warriors are not useful in any form of PvE or any form of PvP, that's a little frustrating, rightfully so. So I do think that you have to watch out for that. On the other side, if you perfectly balance the game, you would just have a class called tank, a class called healer, and a class called DPS. You wouldn't have this whole choice thing. And so, you know, you don't want to push so far into the form of balance that you lose class identity. And I think that making tanks lose their enmity generation is making them more, like, you're losing part of their identity, and they're just becoming melee DPS. So I don't know. I disagree with it as a change. I do think that it's going to make the game more casual. I think this will probably be the most negative of the videos we put out around Shadowbringers. And it's still not saying the game is broken. It's just saying that these are the kind of changes that led to the casualization of things in WoW. To the point where all you do on top of this is put in a loot system where every time, you know, create a new tome that sometimes drops and you can use it to upgrade your gear, or create a Titan forging type system where when you buy gear off the vendor or you get gear in your weekly raid, it has a chance to upgrade to Savage eye levels. And you will literally have pushed yourself into the casualization that people are coming from WoW because of. And they didn't get there slowly. They got there through the erosion of class identity. And it happened over one after another, after another, after another small decision. So this one just concerns me. It's not that the sky is falling down. Like, it's not. Let's stop before anybody says the sky is falling down or this is the greatest game of all time. Before either extreme is touted, let's stop and give it 5.0, maybe 5.1, maybe 5.2, right? Let's see some content. Let's see some initial balance changes. And let's kind of get a feel for what their intent is before we go around and just say, well, this is it. Like, I'm done. I played this game for 10 years. And just like that, like, you know, Brian says, hey, I heard this thing about your wife. And it's like, well, I'm not going to ask her about it or address it. I'm just going to leave. Like, no. We have a great relationship with this game. It's just something that I think there needs to be an open and honest dialogue about, because it could lead to a series of changes that kind of just make tanking not worth doing.
Well, and the other side of the coin is, like, you know, I'm going to turn on my engineering brain here, is that right now, like, if there is such a severe lack in tanking that they're like, people aren't doing it, right? That especially when it gets to the harder difficulty levels, that there is such a skill gap, because that's what they're probably looking at with the numbers. How do they help reduce that skill gap to kind of fill in that slot so that there's more people engaging in the content and not being felt like left out? Not making an excuse for it. I'm just saying that fundamentally and engineering wise, I have long wished that the game kind of had 5 or 6 man content, or at least more 8 man content from the regards of dungeons, because I think that helps fill and, you know, more of those slots. I think this is a easier and development position when it comes down to it, and we kind of talked to Yoshi P about this in a couple of different contexts. But when it comes down to it, it's easier to make this change than it is to go back and make the game, Dungeons 5 man, or update Dungeons to be 8 man, because that kind of work is just absurd and it's just going to take too much time. And the reason I bring that up is that if that is the intent of this change, because essentially, like, when you look at, we had 3 tanks, now we have 4 tanks. Like, okay, well, this tank has a DPS loss with this tank stance, so the requirement for all Savage is that you need to learn how to do this without your tank stance on, that then forces like more pressure on the healers. Like it's not like none of these changes are set in their own silo. They're all contained with how do tanks relate to healers, how do the healers relate to the rest of the party, etc. And so if you're looking at it, because I honestly have always thought that tanking is the easiest role in the game, but it's the one that I think causes a lot of anxiety when it comes down to it. And that's why we make our beginning guide series regarding tanks. Like, guys, like, just take a breath, let people know you're new. Here's the 6 things that you need to worry about for 4-man content. Let us know when you're ready to do Savage Raids. We'll have a different conversation there. But the goal is to get you comfortable in your own skin so that we can get more people in here. I think if this, and I'm not like saying, I'm not saying the sky is falling, but I'm not saying that I'm a fan of this change. If this brings more people into that role, I think healers are going to be what's all like, you're going to see that healer in need aspect, because people, I think, have defaulted to healing, which is weird. I think healing is the most challenging role. You're the role that gets blamed if everything goes wrong.
Yeah, it's binary. If the group succeeds, then the healing did its job, and if the group fails, then the healer failed. And those are the only 2 options. There's never brilliant healing. There's never, like in a roulette, it's very rarely that you see people recognizing when the healer did something outside of ordinary. Mm-hmm. It's just, you kept me alive. What do you want for it? So it is a job that I feel doesn't get the same recognition.
Ultimately, go ahead.
No. So I was going to ask you. So on that note, like, do you think that the goal here is to totally shift from tanking to like healing as the emphasis? Because talking about it in the form of Savage, like, I think it's really odd to balance the content around Savage. I think you balance the content around casual play, and then the Savage people will adjust. The Savage people will find a way. And if they have to play in some really weird way, right? Especially when you talk about static content. Mm-hmm. If static content shifts to you bringing more healers or less healers than is recommended when it first comes out, because that overcomes something in the class balancing, I don't see that as a problem. I mean, we see it with Ultimate, right? You see meta saying, oh, Dark Knight's awful, Dark Knight's awful, Dark Knight's awful. And then the first clear of Ultimate had a Dark Knight. So like Savage and Ultimate people, they don't listen to the meta. They're going to just try things out until they find what works for them. I think it's odd to balance the content around that, and would rather see them address more of at least like, I don't know how to ask you this. So like, why is there not 5-mans? Like when they did World Visit, they said, here was the goal. We want to make a data center wide auction house, but we cannot. Mm-hmm. So here's what we're doing instead. If you think that this change was because they can't do 5-mans, why did they not present it in that same way?
Well, it does. I think that ends up confusing the message. It ends up adding in more information than, that all of a sudden people are like, but I want 5-mans. Like anybody who's in here looking at the code, and I think this is clear in our interview with Yoshi P, is that, and he says never to lose hope, and that's actually really important. The dev team is probably some of the hardest working devs, and nothing that I'm about to say is any knock on their skill. It comes down to like simple like budget and numbers. Is it more advantageous for them to build something new that we're going to be excited about, or is it more advantageous for them to go and backfill something that we've already played to all get out? Ultimately, I believe that the one of 2 things that are going to happen, or maybe both, is that 14 at some point is going to have its calamity, which gives them the ability to go through, look at where the game is now, and kind of be able to kind of rewrite how the game functions at a new starting point for everybody, or a new Final Fantasy MMO will release in 5 to 6 years that becomes kind of the thing. And 14 lives and it gets its expansions, and it is what it is as far as it goes. But fundamentally, when you look at the code base, like that's why like you don't see certain things from new expansions making their way into old expansions. The cost of it, unfortunately, is too high, and that's not because they don't want to do it. It just I would say that from a positive perspective is that if you ever see them do it, it means that's just how much they love this game. Is because like just like they added glasses to Ronso and Vieira, like the dev team went above and beyond. They worked extra hours. They found space in which they could go and make that happen, because the game isn't necessarily designed to be backwards compatible. That's why everything kind of gets stacked up new, and why we want why things like chocobos, squadrons, and trusts are 3 separate systems, because it's not necessarily anything that they can say, let's bring it all together. And if they do, and so you like you might be saying like, yeah, they could do it. Yeah, they could, but if it's going to take, 1,000 times longer to do that, we're gonna sit here and be like, where's our dungeon? Where's this? Why why did we get an expansion that just didn't do anything new? And so it's a weird line to walk. That's why we're not seeing that conversation around 5-mans. I think this is the thing that says, how do we try to address this? And then we're going to look at how the healer balance and everything lines up with the trust system, with all of it. It's going to, like, everything's up in the air because, again, not a silo. Trusts. If the queue time's long, guess what you can do? You can run with trust. Trusts aren't as fast as running with people, but if you can beat the dungeon in 20 minutes instead of waiting 30 minutes just to run it in 15 minutes, guess what? You're netting time. And when you take it with the fates, if you are in queue, you can go do something in the open world that is engaging and rewarding, etc. So it has that kind of progression itself. So I would say that just because, like, if you judge this one change alone, yes, it's getting more casual. But if we look at it in the context, I think this is going to be a better question answered sometime around 5.2, sometime with the next expansion of the raid. Because if they're able to really push in mechanical content, I don't care about your rotation. You've got 4 different jobs. They can make one job more rotation heavy, more challenging in terms of technical skill. You can make something less. And that way, nobody's sitting here being like, "Oh, gross! You're a paladin." Like, y'all are still doing the same thing. You pick your poison here, but then the content is challenging. Then this becomes a moot debate. This one change on itself, yes, very casual. I'm not a really fan of it. We have to wait for the context of how this actually applies to the raid and the hardest content in the game, because you might not have time. Like, they could be, especially the healing aspect, when you take it all again as one unit. If healers are just like healing like crazy, damage is going out like crazy, like, it could be some of the most engaging and crazy content we've ever seen in a game. Chris, what are your final thoughts?
No, I think that's good. I think that it's going to be something that's thrown out a lot. Especially, we knew going into this that people would feel their jobs were ruined, or that that there would be mixed feelings, right? For everybody excited, that there would be somebody not excited by the job action trailer because we don't have context. And it's really easy to say, let's picture this in the context of Stormblood. And that's not what this is going to happen. And so even those of us that got hands-on, we still only got hands-on with a limited number of zones, with one dungeon, with, limited time to play with the different jobs. If you ran the stuff out in the world, like I tried a lot of my machinist stuff out in the world, but then I was trying it on fates. And so those fates were synced down. So I didn't get to use the level 80 abilities on my machinist. And so, when you talk about even the people who got hands-on, it's not the same as giving people months of access to this, where we can start to have meta form and things like that. Meta as a whole is not this just terrible thing. There's a reason it forms, and it represents a summary of what we all are thinking. Whether or not that's accurate, it's often accurate. That's why people listen to it. But there are times that meta ends up being shifted, and it ends up meaning something different. So I would say in the context of this, initially, I'm a little concerned about the tank changes. I'm excited about the healer changes. I'm excited about what they're doing with DPS. I think that removing class synergies, the way they're doing it, is good. I think that the MP is actually a good change, and it's going to allow them to better control the number of things that people can cast, which better allows them to balance encounters, knowing exactly how many casts people have, exactly how long of a fight they can sustain. Allows them to scale things to casual, hard, and hardest. So I think the game's in a really good state. I think the game is headed in a really good direction. I do think that it's showing a lot of cracks where you're seeing them run into the limits of what they're capable of. So we're not seeing what the devs intend, we're seeing what the devs can do. And I would like to see what the devs intend to do. And so that does mean that at some point we may see, and whether that's 6.0 or 7.0, that kind of calamity. Lore-wise, it may be a near calamity, but it will be some reason for a or it avoided Calamity, but it would be some reason for a complete redesign. WoW went through it with Cataclysm, so you hear us talk about it a lot with Cataclysm, but let's be clear, we're not talking about Cataclysm content. We're not talking about Cataclysm dungeons and raids and whatever balance has happened. We're talking about Cataclysm on a back end, because one of the reasons that Cataclysm really struggled content-wise, and the reason that there are people who did not like what Cataclysm did to the world, is because the content did feel light to some people, because it was more of a tech expansion. It was more of a back-end expansion where they added in all these tools that we're still seeing the ripples of today that allow them to go back and add really cool events and really cool, like the way things flow and the way people level and things like that, that were actually really positive for the game. And so hopefully Final Fantasy can do that without having to pair it with what will feel like a light expansion. Hopefully they can do that better than WoW did it. And based on everything this dev team's done so far, I don't think that's impossible. I think they have impressed us time and time again. And I'm hoping Shadowbringers will be the best expansion yet.
Yeah, me too. So for Works a Game, my name is Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thank you so much for watching this video, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Hey, it's me. It's been a while since I talked to you guys directly this way, but don't tell anybody. We've got even more epic content planned for this channel. The response has been incredible. We hope to see you. If you're new, hit subscribe, leave us a comment. I'd like to talk to you more about video games. I can't seem to speak my language. All right.